At the weekend, Mr. Speaker, we learned from the former Chancellor that his deal was offered to the former Prime Minister 18 months ago, and she rejected it as not good enough for the United Kingdom. So, we have a rejected and recycled deal that has been misrepresented by ministers in this House, no doubt inadvertently. The Prime Minister said in terms there would be no checks on goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Brexit Secretary himself has confirmed that there will be. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made promises to Labour members about workers' rights. I remember him with all the concentration he could muster, saying that workers' rights would be protected by him. The leak to the Financial Times on Saturday shows these promises simply cannot be trusted. He says the NHS, Mr. Speaker, he says the NHS is off the table for any trade deal. Yet, a majority of the British public don't trust him. And why should they? Why should they, Mr. Speaker? Thanks to a Channel 4 dispatches programme, this is actually quite an important point the Prime Minister might care to listen to. I'll go through it again. Thanks to...
Order. The right honourable gentleman is entirely at liberty to do so. If there are people trying to shout the Leader of the Opposition down, stop it. It's deeply low grade. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, thanks to a Channel 4 dispatches programme, we learn that secret meetings have taken place between... The member opposite may find this funny, but actually it's quite serious for our National Health Service. We learn, Mr. Speaker, that secret...
Sorry, point of order, Michael Fabricant.
I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the enunciators may not have been working in the offices of Labour MPs, because most of them have not chosen to turn up today. Can that be investigated?
It doesn't need to be investigated at all. Unfortunately, it's not even a very good try, as the smile on the face of the honourable gentleman readily testifies. It's a very substandard attempt at a bogus point of order. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because I think this section is very important, I'll go through it again. The Channel 4 dispatches programme has told us that we learn secret meetings have taken place between government officials of the UK government and representatives of US pharmaceutical firms, where the price of National Health Service drugs has been discussed. Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister who will say anything, do anything to get his way. He will avoid his responsibilities. He will avoid his responsibilities, break his promises to dodge scrutiny. And today he wants an election and his bill. Well, not with our endorsement. He says he wants an election on the 12th of December, though how can we trust him? How can we trust him that he will stick to that date? When we do not yet have legal confirmation of the extension. The Prime Minister has not formally accepted, and the other 27 have not confirmed following that acceptance. The reason I'm so cautious is quite simply I do not trust the Prime Minister. A 12th...
Order. I don't know whether the Prime Minister was seeking to intervene.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Gentleman Leader of the Opposition is mistaken. As I always said, this government obeys the law. We comply with the law, and that has taken its course. Parliament asked for this delay. Now it's up to him to go to the country in a general election. That's what he should do.
That's not a matter for the avoidance of doubt. Such matters are not matters for the chair, but the Prime Minister's made his own point, apparently to his own satisfaction. The Leader of the Opposition.
Can I simply say this to the Prime Minister? If he always obeys the law, why was he found guilty by the Supreme Court?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of
Order. No, I don't care how long it takes. I'm not having the honourable gentleman shouted down and prevented from being heard. That will not work. End of subject. Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of trust, which my right friend is quite rightly pointing out, is he aware of the very interesting rumours that have reached my ear that the Prime Minister might, for example, not be planning to even stand in his own constituency at an upcoming general election, and instead apparently has lined up Sevenoaks or East Yorkshire? I wonder if he's heard that rumour.
I'm grateful to my friend for his intervention. I would put nothing past the Prime Minister. All I do know is we have an excellent Labour candidate in Uxbridge.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. And like my honourable friend said a moment ago, I don't trust the Prime Minister either, but there is a deeper issue about whether we can trust the Prime Minister with our safety. Let me just read this to you very briefly. Analysis from the Financial Times today. The Prime Minister could shake his head, but perhaps he would care to listen.
Go on, Paula.
So, when Johnson responded, I have never heard such humbug.
Order. Invite the Honourable Lady to resume her seat. The Honourable Lady has a right to be heard, not to be shouted down by frontbenchers or back, and she won't be. Paula Sheriff.
Thank you. When Johnson responded, I have never heard such humbug in all my life, Labour MP Paula Sheriff began to receive toxic tweets at a rate of more than 100 an hour. One such tweet from that evening read, "Tough shit, Mrs Shrek. A surrender bill or surrender act is exactly what Ben's treacherous act is." Another read, "Do what the people told you to effing do. Otherwise, yes, expect to be strung up metaphorically or physically." The Prime Minister has never apologised for saying what he said that evening, so how can we trust him that we can be safe?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend for her intervention and for the stoic way in which she's dealt with the most appalling abuse that's been thrown at her. The threats that she's received, the threats that other colleagues have received, the damage that's been done to MPs' offices, and the abusive language that has happened in so many parts of this country. And I will be happy to give way to the Prime Minister now if he wants to get up and apologise to my friend for what he said about her during that debate. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has an opportunity to apologise for the language he used. He seems unable to do so. The treatment she received was disgusting by any standards. And I would also point out that numbers of...
I'll happily apologise if the Shadow Chancellor would, for instance, apologise for inviting the population to lynch the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
Well, sorry seems to be the hardest word, doesn't it? Mr. Speaker.
They over here.
Thank you. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that we have a Prime Minister that has a tortuous and difficult relationship with veracity, and therefore he's absolutely right not to believe a single word that comes out of that man's mouth?
Yes.
I thank my friend for that intervention, and she is right. That is why many of us are very cautious at believing anything the Prime Minister said. We want it tied down before we agree to anything. The 12th of December election is less than a fortnight before Christmas, 9 days before the shortest day of the year. I'll come to you 1 second. The House must consider that in parts of this country it will be dark before 4 p.m. Many students will have just finished their term and gone home for Christmas. Well, actually, people having the right to vote is what an election is all about. And they risk being disenfranchised.
I thank him for giving way. If we go back to workers' rights, and he correctly says the Prime Minister can't be trusted in workers' rights, so can you explain why he'd backbench Labour MPs who said they secured workers' right concessions of the Prime Minister, why 19 of his MPs actually backed the withdrawal agreement, and if the Prime Minister is so incompetent, is there any point where he's not going to keep him in power?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claimed he would defend workers' rights. All the information in the Financial Times at the weekend suggests that he will not do that at all. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, about students and their opportunity to vote on the dates in question, the latter point may not be the case on the 9th of December, and we will consider carefully any legislation proposed that locks in the date. The theme of this is we don't trust the Prime Minister. We want something that definitely and definitively takes no deal off the table and ensures that the voting rights of all of our citizens are protected. One giveaway.
I'm very grateful to the Leader of the Opposition. If we take him at his word that this is the most untrustworthy government and Prime Minister, wedded to doing the most evil and disastrous things to this country, can he explain to me his reticence for a general election where he has the chance to sweep us out of office?
We have said all along we want no deal off the table, and since there is so little trust in this Prime Minister, we will agree to nothing until it's clear and concrete exactly what is being proposed. And so, Mr. Speaker, we agree that an early election is necessary, but also seek good reason, since no general election has been held in December since 1923. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a bill to deliver. He has a budget to present. He has a Queen's speech, which he himself told us was vital. He should, for once in his life, stick to his word and deliver. He says in his misogynistic way that people should man up. A bit rich for a Prime Minister who at every turn refuses to face up to his responsibilities and serially breaks his promises.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he also agree with me that the timing of this proposed general election, not whether we have a general election, is yet another example of the art of voter suppression, ensuring students are less likely to have a vote, older people less likely to go out and vote, people with disabilities less likely to go out and vote. If the Prime Minister truly believed in democracy, wouldn't he hold the election when people were able to go and cast their vote?
Mr. Speaker, when no deal is off the table, when the date for an election can be fixed in law, and when we can ensure students are not being disenfranchised, we will back an election so this country can get the government it needs. One that will end the underfunding of our public services. One will end the privatisation of our services. One that will tackle the grotesque poverty and inequality in our country created by this government and the government before it. and recognises the seriousness of the climate emergency, and one that will rebuild an economy that doesn't just work for the privileged few, as it all the Tory party knows about, but will build a society that ends inequality and injustice and really does give the next generation real hope and real opportunities of the kind of country and kind of world that they can live in.
John Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, this Parliament is once again misjudging the mood of the public. We were elected here to do serious things on behalf of our public. Conservative and Labour MPs alike were elected to see Brexit through. 3 years, 4 months later, there's no sign of that. And instead, we have this discordant, argumentative Parliament that will do nothing. It will not throw a government out of office, and it will not allow a government to govern. We owe it to the British people either to allow our government to govern or to let the British people decide on a better group of MPs who can form a government and can do positive things for our country. I give way.
Every constituency in my region at the 2016 referendum voted by a huge margin to leave the European Union. And at that time, lots of constituents said to me in some of the most deprived communities of this country that they didn't trust this Parliament to deliver it. They said, we won't get it. They'll never let us leave. Well, isn't the truth of it that the 5 Conservative MPs out of 10 in my region, of the 10 total MPs, might have voted to deliver Brexit, but it is really clear that the Labour MPs, bar 1 or 2 examples across my region, are never going to vote to leave the European Union, proving, sadly right, my constituents who said they'll never let us leave.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right, but it is now about more than Brexit. It is about confidence in our parliamentary system to deliver orderly government that can do things for the people, or to allow the public to decide who should be a better government because the House has no confidence in the government. This Parliament needs to put through a budget quite soon. Our economy needs a boost, and we need to know whether we can have the tax cuts as well as the spending increases. But I suspect the government fears to bring a budget to this House because it thinks there will be no cooperation, because it does not have a majority, and this Parliament will not allow a majority. This government has recently brought a Queen's speech to the House. It shows a number of good measures which I do not think were ideological or conservative provocations to socialists and those of a more left-wing nature. They were chosen to build some consensus and address the issues that worry people. But I think, again, the government rightly fears that any one of those issues, if introduced, would probably meet with resistance and a lack of cooperation in exactly the way we have been experiencing for all these other measures. But above all, Mr. Speaker, this House needs to think what message it is sending to all our partners, friends, allies, countries around the world, the businesses our business do business with, all those contacts we have in the globe. And they see this as a great beacon of democracy, a country of great experience in the art of democratic government, a country which has often led the world in putting forward those freedoms and showing how they can be for the better lives of those who are governed by them. And instead, we are sending out a message that we don't know what we're doing. We can never agree about anything, that all we can do is have endless rows in this place for the entertainment, perhaps, of people here, but for the denigration of our country, the undermining of its position. How can a government conduct international negotiations when everything it proposes is undermined or voted against by the opposition because we do not have a majority? And above all, Mr. Speaker, how can we get to the point where this House decides it's good legislation to say that the Prime Minister has to break his promises, and that they've turned that demand that he breaks his promises into something that this House calls an Act of Parliament? No wonder we look ridiculous. No longer we cannot resolve Brexit. No wonder we cannot have a budget to promote our economy. No wonder we cannot govern with aplomb in the interest of the British people. If this House cannot do better, then I think the Prime Minister is right, that it must dissolve and ask the people to choose a better Parliament. Either we need to be a better Parliament or they need to choose a better Parliament as soon as possible.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by thanking the European Union for granting the extension that this Parliament asked for under the Benn Act? We are not leaving Europe on the 31st of October, as the Prime Minister told the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom that we would be doing. The Conservative Party and the Prime Minister defeated, Mr. Speaker, once again. Mr. Speaker, a general election on the terms offered by the Prime Minister are not and will not ever be acceptable to the Scottish National Party. But, Mr. Speaker, doing nothing is not an option. The impasse cannot remain forever. We in these benches do want an election, but not with the hand that the Prime Minister is delivering. Because, let's be clear, what the Prime Minister promises. He proposes to bring back his bad withdrawal deal. He knows that some Labour MPs will help him pass that bill. And then he would have us leave the European Union at the end of November before a general election. For Scotland, that would mean we'd been taken out of the European Union against our will. We will never vote for such a proposition. It would give the Prime Minister a post-Brexit election. And that is simply something that we will not sign up to.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, myself and the leader of the Liberal Democrats wrote to Donald Tusk seeking a meaningful extension to Article 50 that would remove the risk of no deal and give us time. The continuation of the flextension, where the UK can leave at the end of any month in which it passes the motion, is not the complete safety and security we want, but demonstrates precisely why. If we enable this motion to pass, we will be out before the Prime Minister's election. We cannot allow the Prime Minister to railroad through this disastrous so-called deal. A deal that opens the door to a hard Brexit with us outside the single market and outside the customs union. A deal that would end freedom of movement, seeing Scotland's working population decline. That's what the Conservatives offer to the people of Scotland. The people of Scotland have made it very clear, because we voted 62% to remain in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, where is the respect to the people of Scotland and to our Parliament? A deal, after all, that leaves Scotland at a disadvantage to Northern Ireland. A deal that will not have the consent of the Scottish Parliament. And let me tell the Prime Minister that that consent is required, despite what he said at Prime Minister's questions last week. And he must respect that must be respect towards the Scottish Parliament. A deal, of course, that would cost each person in Scotland the equivalent of £1,600 compared with EU membership, and even more if no trade agreement can be reached. So today, SNP MPs will not be supporting the Prime Minister in his motion. We will not be bullied by this Prime Minister. We will not play his games. And we know what he doesn't want. He doesn't want to face the electorate having missed his October the 31st deadline. He has not delivered Brexit, and the people know that the Prime Minister has failed. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it is time for the Prime Minister to look for the nearest ditch. So we will support the Liberal Democrat proposal for an election before Brexit can happen, with no reintroduction of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Because given the way that some Labour MPs voted, we cannot trust Labour to block the bill in future. It's not an issue of 3 days between election dates. It's an issue of whether we are in the European Union or out of it. That is fundamental. We are ready for an election, but it must be on those terms, not ever on the Prime Minister's terms. And, Mr. Speaker, in that election, we want to see votes for 16 and 17-year-olds and for EU nationals. And when the election comes, we will fight the Tories on Brexit, on the rate clause, on austerity, on the harm they have done to people's lives, on their livelihoods, and yes, we will fight them on the right of Scotland to choose our own future rather than being dragged through this Westminster mess ever again.
I'm very grateful to the leader of the SNP for giving way. Does that mean that if the Prime Minister were to introduce a bill tomorrow, for example, a one-line bill in order to engineer a general election, that, after what he said, that he would not be supporting that proposition?
What I would say to the Labour Party, that the Liberal Democrats and ourselves have put forward a bill that leaves us in control of the process, that allows us to set the date for the election. And I appeal to Labour MPs to come with us, because this is about leadership, Mr. Speaker. It is about the opposition parties coming together and taking the keys of number 10 Downing Street away from a Prime Minister that we can't trust. So my message to the Labour Party is, let's face an election. Let's do it on our terms. Let's make sure that we take the Prime Minister and his toxic Tory government out of office. We can do it. We can do it if the opposition unite together, and we can stop the deal that the Prime Minister wants to drive through. It's in the hands of the Labour Party to join us and the Liberal Democrats, to have courage to stand up against the Prime Minister. But what are we going to find? We find that the Labour Party want to sit on their hands. Sit on their hands, Mr. Speaker, and wait for this government to deliver a Brexit. I say to the Labour Party, don't be the handmaidens of the Prime Minister's Brexit. Let's put this back to the people now by coming together. You know, it used to be said, it was said by Oliver Brown, a well-known Scottish nationalist, that a shiver ran along the Labour front bench looking for a spine to crawl up. Well, Mr. Speaker, the shiver's still looking for that spine. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party are standing up for Scotland, standing up against Brexit and this Tory government. The Scottish National Party has fought tirelessly alongside others in this House to prevent Brexit, to secure the right to revoke Article 50, to stop no deal and to limit the damage. We have delivered the votes day in and day out, but we have to be realistic and we have to be honest with the public. We have repeatedly voted for a referendum with Remain on the ballot paper, but regrettably there is no evidence that the majority exists in this House for a people's vote. And the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor are acutely aware that if the bill comes back, that some of their MPs will back it, that the bill will become law and Brexit will happen. So the question for the Labour Party is, can they get their act together? Do they actually want to stop this Prime Minister? Do they want to stop Brexit? Or do they agree that it should be imposed on Scotland against our will? Doing nothing means that this Prime Minister stays in power. It means he gets Brexit done on his terms, in his party's interests, not on all our national interests. I will give way.
I'm supremely grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I just want to go back to clarify something he said earlier. He talked about his link-up with the Liberal Democrats, about wanting to have an election at a different date in December, and then he went on to say that that would be conditional on 16-year-olds being on the ballot paper and European Union citizens. Can I just ask him this simple question? If there is no time to put them on, does he still back the idea of an election in early December?
I would simply say, Mr. Speaker, it is the right thing to do, that our young people have a right to have a say on their future, as it is for EU nationals. That is the principal position that we have long taken, and I'm proud that my colleagues in government in Scotland have made sure, when it comes to our Scottish election, that our young people and our EU citizens are given their rights. Now, we want to see this happen here, but I understand the circumstances that we're in, that we need to make sure that an election happens on our terms. That is the priority. It is the priority that we make sure that we legislate in future that our young people, that our EU nationals are given due respect. But the priority that we face in the short term is to make sure that we come together, that we can stop this damaging Brexit that the Prime Minister wants to put through. I'll give one last time, I'll give way, then I'll...
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I listened carefully to what he said about 16 and 17-year-olds. I certainly would be bringing an amendment to any bill like that, and I was very interested to hear what he said, because that's what we now have the pleasure of having in Wales. He also mentioned EU voters, but would he also agree there's an issue with overseas voters, many of whom were excluded in previous elections, and also, of course, crucial issues around spending on advertising on social media that would need to be addressed before we could be clear that any election could go forward in a safe and democratic way?
The honourable gentleman is raising issues which have been aired in this House, which he knows that we support him on. But the fact of the matter is that we are in a constitutional crisis. And I ask this House to reflect on one thing. We've been granted an extension by the European Union till the end of January. It is emboldened on all of us that we have got to end this crisis. Time is of the essence. And if we act now in all our national interests, without playing the games that the Conservatives want to, we can have that election. We can put it back to the people. And I certainly want the people in Scotland to have their say on that. And crucially, Mr. Speaker, to recognise that if we want to protect our interests in Scotland, that it does mean that we should not and cannot be ripped out of the European Union against our will. And, Mr. Speaker, that means that Scotland has to complete that journey that we began with devolution 20 years ago and become an independent member of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the SNP... Well, there we are. There's the message to the people of Scotland. Sit down and shut up. That's what we get from the Conservatives. That was absolutely loud and clear, and it comes over time and time again. I will say to you this, that people at home are watching this. They can see the disrespect that's shown. And the day where this union comes to an end is fast approaching, Mr. Speaker. The SNP will never, not ever, vote for Brexit. We cannot and will not trust this Prime Minister. The Scottish National Party does not want to leave this Prime Minister with time in Parliament to do anything other than dissolve it. So we will not vote with the government tonight. But make no mistake, the Scottish National Party are ready to give people back their say, to stop this Tory government, to stop Brexit, and to demand the right to choose Scotland's future as an independent country. Mr. Speaker, our destiny.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation is very simple. The bottom line is this, that the Labour Party is scared...
The honourable gentleman, the member for Stone, the chair of the European Scrutiny Committee, a member who served without interruption in this House for the last 35 years, must and will be heard. Sir William Cash.
As I said, the real question, the bottom line is this. I heard the right honourable gentleman just now talking about disrespect. I heard the Leader of the Opposition talking about trust. What those who are either abstaining or voting against this motion are doing is utterly disrespectful to their own constituents, is utterly disrespectful to our democratic system. They are not trusting the people. They are not removing the uncertainty. They are not allowing the British people the democratic right that they have to choose the members of Parliament in individual constituencies that they wish to elect. That is a denial of democracy. That is what the Leader of the Opposition and the right honourable gentleman who's just spoken are doing. It is completely and totally unacceptable, whether they are Remainers or whether they are Leavers. The democratic right of the British people is to have a general election in the situation that we are in now. Yes, certainly we should be supporting leaving the European Union. But for those who are Remainers, they too have the right to vote, and that is being denied to them by the Leader of the Opposition and by every single Labour Member of Parliament and others who are either abstaining or who are voting against this motion today. It is a total denial of democracy. And when it comes to the general election, I trust that the people who know why they've been denied it vote against those members of Parliament to make sure that they themselves see the damage that they've done to our democratic system.
Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. I appreciate that there are different views on different sides of the House on that matter, but I hope people will appreciate that at least the Liberal Democrats have been consistent on wanting to stop Brexit throughout this process. Now, we believe... I will make some progress and I will give way. We believe the best way to do this is to put a specific Brexit deal to the public for a final say in a people's vote. We have been leading the campaign for a people's vote for 3.5 years. We stood in the 2017 election in a manifesto that argued for a people's vote. And 17 times in this House we have laid amendments for a people's vote, including last week an amendment to the Queen's speech. And the opposition, the official opposition, have refused to back wholeheartedly a people's vote. And in fact, 19 Labour MPs voted for the Prime Minister's deal last week. So when it comes to the cause of remaining in the EU and of stopping Brexit, the Labour Party have not delivered. We have put our best efforts in, but so far the House has not yet backed those in sufficient numbers.
Would you give way?
I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful. Actually, not all of our MPs have always been so unequivocal on this, because the Honourable Member for Streatham voted in favour of Article 50, although he never tells the House that, when I voted against it. But can I just ask her why she believes using an electoral system which her party, and indeed I have, her party has always thought does not deliver a fair result, i.e. through a general election, to solve this issue, rather than sticking to the point that we should be seeking a referendum on this issue. Otherwise, she could end up delivering a hard Brexit on only 38% of the vote, not 51% of the vote.
Well, I will always welcome any converts to the cause of electoral reform, or indeed long-standing supporters. This is an issue where we are looking for the best way to protect our constituents and to protect our place in the European Union. But MPs should not kid themselves that by hanging on that there is somehow going to be a different outcome. Because the reality, I'm responding to the previous question, because the reality of the situation is this. We have secured an extension to Article 50 to the 31st of January. It was not automatic, it was not guaranteed, and it was not given by return of email. It was deliberated over, it was agonised over by our EU friends, and certain members of the EU were pushing very hard for there to be a very short extension of Article 50, and they said very clearly that there needed to be a clear purpose for Article 50. So if the House of Commons can make it clear that the purpose would be to have a people's vote, I would be delighted. We have been campaigning for this for 3.5 years, and this afternoon I have tabled at the table office an early day motion calling again for a people's vote. So if MPs really want to demonstrate that the numbers are now there, go to the table office and sign it. But don't give me wishful thinking that the numbers are there when the real risk is we could crash out on the 31st of January instead of the 31st of October, and that is no better. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. if the election goes ahead and she is successful in stopping Brexit, would she share government with the Leader of the Opposition? Because I don't see how else it would work.
I've been very clear that I do not believe the Leader of the Opposition or the Prime Minister are the right people to be in our government and to be leading the country. I've been very clear about that, and I'll be crystal clear about that. And in a general election, I will go to the country and make my case that we should have a Liberal Democrat government. And a Liberal Democrat government would revoke Article 50 on day one, and that is the best way to stop Brexit. We need to see the path forward, and if it is not
and secondly, is running scared of the electorate. Can I say, Mr. Speaker, we will not be supporting this motion tonight, but not because we are scared of the electorate. In fact, I can tell you the electorate, the Unionist electorate in Northern Ireland, are so angry, so despairing, so bewildered at the way in which the Prime Minister has broken his promises to the people of Northern Ireland that they would return 100 DUP MPs if they had the option. So we're not scared of a general election. And secondly, we are not trying to stop Brexit. In fact, we have been pilloried in this House because we have been seen to be some of the most determined people to deliver Brexit. But the Brexit that we have on offer is not a Brexit for the United Kingdom. It's a Brexit for part of the United Kingdom. It leaves Northern Ireland still within the single market. It leaves Northern Ireland still under the customs code of the EU. It means that any goods coming into Northern Ireland from GB will be subject to customs checks, to customs declarations, to tariffs. It means that when we send goods to another part of our own country, we've got to sign export declarations, all of which add costs and delays to the economy of Northern Ireland and will put a huge imposition on small firms, thousands of small firms that currently trade freely with the rest of the United Kingdom and suddenly will find themselves having to treat the country to which they belong as a third country when it comes to trade. And despite what the Prime Minister has said, the withdrawal agreement makes it quite clear that we will not be able to take part in trade deals which our country does with other parts of the world if they go against the protocols within the agreement. I'll give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree that the issues between the additional bureaucracy for business between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and Northern Ireland is all the more stark when you look at the statistics which show that Northern Ireland trades more with Great Britain than with the Republic of Ireland, the European Union and the rest of the world put together? So to put a barrier to our biggest market by far is hugely significant for the economy of Northern Ireland.
And the number is right, and sometimes statistics can go over the top of people's heads. But let's also bear in mind that it goes totally against the promises that were made by both the former Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister, that there be no impediments of trade between our part of the United Kingdom and GB, and also that there would be no danger of the Union being imperilled. And I will give way, yes.
Would the honourable gentleman accept that this dreadful border down the Irish Sea would be avoided if the whole of the United Kingdom left the customs union and left the single market, which I think his party has always supported? But now the Prime Minister has gone back on that and abandoned that, would his party be prepared to accept the entire of the United Kingdom during the transition period, staying in the customs union and staying in the single market, leaving the whole thing to be negotiated over the next 2 or 3 years during the transition period? That would rescue Ulster from this absurd position which is proposed, putting these barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
Of course, the member will know that it's only half of the answer, because we're still left under this agreement within the rules of the single market, still subject to the European Court of Justice making adjudication about whether or not we have adhered to those rules, and still subject to the EU being able to deny the United Kingdom government in imposing changes which are made in the law here in Westminster to Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, there are very good reasons why we oppose this deal. And the motion before us tonight does not offer any hope of any change. In fact, if anything, it's the Prime Minister is quite openly saying, and by the way, I now want Democratic Unionist Party MPs to vote for the accelerated passage of the bill which would facilitate this agreement, which would have such detrimental effects on Northern Ireland. We don't want to have accelerated passage. We don't want to have 24-hour scrutiny. We want to make sure that there is nothing happens in this House which enables the Prime Minister to deliver on a deal which he promised he would never ever do.
That's what he said.
And the second thing, of course, is that if he gets this general election, as he made clear to my honourable friend from North Antrim, what platform will he be standing on? What mandate will he be seeking? What strategy will he be putting forward in that election? What will be in his manifesto? That he wants to come back here with a majority to deliver the death deal to the Union in Northern Ireland. Now, that's an offer. Accelerated passage of a bill which would facilitate this agreement, and an election which the Prime Minister would use to justify breaking his promises to the people of Northern Ireland. That's an offer which we can refuse, and will be quite happy to refuse. Because whilst we want to see Brexit delivered, we want to see it delivered for the whole of the United Kingdom. We want to see it delivered in the form that the Prime Minister 3 times, or well, twice, because he changed his mind the third time, but twice voted for in this House. And we will not be prepared to facilitate him moving the goalposts affecting Northern Ireland this way. And for that reason, whilst we do not fear a general election, whilst we want to see Brexit delivered, if it's not going to be delivered for the whole of the United Kingdom, then I don't think that anyone in this House could possibly condemn us for standing up for our constituents who will be damaged economically, our constituents who will be damaged constitutionally. I'll give way, yes.
I'm very grateful. The Honourable Gentleman has been extremely generous. Can I just put it to him that if we were to have a general election, that would simply be a de facto referendum part 2, because there would be no other subject under debate during that general election but this issue of Brexit? And would that not be an absolute dereliction of our duty were we to allow something as important as a general election to be hijacked and simply be a weak ersatz version of another referendum?
Well, of course, the member's trying to draw me then, of course, that this should be decided by a second referendum. I don't believe it should be decided by a second referendum because, of course, the first referendum has not been delivered on. And we want to see the first referendum delivered on. We want to see it delivered for the United Kingdom as a whole. One last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker. Well, just let me make this point first of all, and then I'll give way. One last point I want to make. The argument has been put forward here tonight that we need a general election because this has now become a zombie parliament. The government can't get any business through. We are not wreckers. We do not want to see the United Kingdom ungovernable. And indeed, the reason why we voted with the government in the Queen's speech last week was because we wanted to see that the government had a programme to get through. We wanted to give that support. Yeah. We do not want to see the United Kingdom made ungovernable. Yeah. But the one thing we're not prepared to do is to see the United Kingdom divided, to see the Union destroyed. And that's why we cannot take part in or give support to this vote tonight. And I'll give way to
Would it be a way through if the government went to Brussels now and said they would like to initiate free trade talks immediately so that we could leave with no tariffs and new barriers if they agreed to such talks, rather than signing the withdrawal agreement?
You know, this is one of the suggestions that the Prime Minister... I know we're wandering a bit from the motion here, Mr. Speaker. I hope you'll allow me, indulge me, just to answer the point. This is one of the arguments that the Prime Minister has put forward, that surely all of this will just disappear if and when we have a free trade arrangement. But the withdrawal agreement makes it very clear under an article, I think it's Article 15 and 8, 13.8, that even with a free trade arrangement, that there is still, and this would have to be agreed with the EU, so they have a veto, so much for the claim that we've got sovereignty back, that the EU could have a free trade arrangement which would still leave Northern Ireland fully or in part within the protocols in the agreement. So, whilst I would love to think that would be a way out, and we'd love to see that would be a way out, unfortunately, the agreement which the Prime Minister has signed does not allow it to be a way out. Yet another reason why we've got to get this right, and yet another reason why we don't believe that debating, scrutinising, accelerating the passage of this bill through the House and then a general election to get a mandate to implement it is correct. And I'll finish now. Thank you.
The honourable gentleman has completed his speech. Mr. Nigel Evans.
Mr. Speaker, I only want to speak briefly on this matter because it's an Alice in Wonderland politics that we find ourselves in today. I'm in my 28th year in Parliament, and I've never seen anything so incredible as I have since the British people voted in 2016 to leave the European Union. We gave them that contract, and I know that Project Fear didn't quite work, and they didn't quite weren't scared enough to vote to remain in. They actually said no. We've heard what everybody has said is going to happen, that the sky would fall in, but we're still prepared to vote to leave the European Union, because I think in many cases they just didn't simply believe some of the scare stories that they were told. Of course I'd give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman so much for giving way. Does he agree with me? It's not just people that voted to leave, but people like me who voted to remain, who want this done, as he's saying.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I've just done a 2-day tour around my constituency last Friday and Saturday, and I spoke to a number of people. There were 3 hardcore Remainers who would almost do anything to remain in the European Union. But the vast majority of people who come up to me in the Ribble Valley say, I either voted leave, get on with it, and they're quite angry, actually, quite angry that we haven't left the European Union yet. And then there are others who say, I voted remain, but I can't believe that we're still in the European Union. I'm a Democrat. I actually believe in democracy, and when we have a referendum, we actually believe in carrying out the wishes of that referendum. And we all remember what was written on the back of that pamphlet. It said that we would follow the instructions of the British people in that referendum. And even better than that, of course, is we had a general election in 2017. And in that general election, we said that we would deliver Brexit. The Labour Party stood in that general election and said they would deliver Brexit. But what do we find? Ever since that general election, we have seen dither and delay, anything but vote for the Brexit that they promised. It was either not the right deal, or we've got to have no deal taken off the table. Well, we had an opportunity last week to take no deal off the table. And that was the possibility that the Labour Party could have actually fulfilled their promise of that general election 2 years ago and voted for the deal that the Prime Minister brought back from Brussels. But no, the vast majority of the Labour MPs voted against second reading. And what that meant was they didn't want it to go any further. There was no possibility of them amending that legislation to have a customs union, to get workers' rights, to get higher environmental standards. No, they decided they wanted to stop Brexit in its tracks, and that's why they voted against the second reading. At least only 19 of them voted to give it a second reading. And I would say that in my constituency in the Ribble Valley, it's in the heart of Lancashire. In fact, by an OS map, one of my villages is actually in the very centre of the United Kingdom. My constituency voted 57% to leave the European Union. Every constituency in Lancashire, whether they have a Labour MP or a Conservative MP, gratefully we don't have any Lib Dems in Lancashire, they all voted to leave the European Union. And so what I would say is that what we are doing tonight, and it's quite remarkable, the Labour Party said that they would deliver Brexit, and now they clearly are not doing that. They then said that they wanted more time to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill, even though the vast majority of them voted against it going any further. They wanted more time. And so tonight, we're offering them more time. They then say they want an early general election. Well, The way they get an early general election is by voting for the motion tonight. They get more time to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill, so at least they'll fulfil part of their promise 2 years ago, and then they'll get their early general election on December the 12th, whereby then they can put forward the programme that they wish and see where the people go. On the other hand, we've got the Scott Nats, who basically, at least are saying December the 9th. They don't want to deliver Brexit, they never have, but nonetheless, they're being consistent on that. All I would say to them, and we hear all time and time again that Scotland voted not to leave the European Union. More than 1 million Scots voted to leave the European Union. There's no reaching out to those million Scots. More people voted to leave the European Union in Scotland than voted for the Scottish National Party. And so we'll see where that goes there. And then the Lib Dems, they just want to revoke Article 50. That's all they want to do, revoke Article 50. They're called the Liberal Democrats. I don't know which aspect of the Liberal Democrats are democratic, because we had a referendum, the people said they wanted to leave, and that's not being fulfilled. I'll give way to my right speaker.
I thank my honourable friend. As far as I understand it, the Right Honourable Lady, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, did say that if we had a second referendum, she might not agree with its result, and I wonder whether that's true.
That was a previous position, but we're in an even more bizarre position with the Labour Party, because they say if they win the election, they will go to Brussels, renegotiate Brexit, then put that to the British people in a second referendum and campaign against the deal they just negotiated. I mean, that is the most Alice in Wonderland politics that I have seen in 28 years, and now we have an opposition that has been calling for an early general election running scared. The last thing they want to do is face the electorate. And quite frankly, I can see why.
Mike Gates.
Mr. Speaker, we are apparently approaching the season of goodwill. And we are supposed to have Christmas parties in our primary schools, and we are all supposed to wish each other season's greetings. I do hope that people who want a season of goodwill have not been watching these exchanges today. They say that people who are turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas. That is probably true. But it's also apparent that some people have been on chicken runs from one constituency to another. And it seems to me, no, I'm standing in Ilford South. I'm not running anywhere. I'm standing for my own constituency. Thank you very much. I'll give way, yes.
I respect the honourable member. I wonder whether he was referring to former members of the independent group when he said they were on the chicken run from one constituency to another.
The people who are doing it, and perhaps who will do it, know who they are. I'm not going to name. It seems to me the only way we are going to end this rancorous, divisive politics is to be realistic. If there is a general election and a party gets a big majority by polling 35 or 40% of the vote, that will still leave a majority in this country extremely unhappy with the outcome. And given that a referendum, in my view, a misguided referendum, an advisory referendum, but nevertheless a referendum that the former Prime Minister David Cameron said would be binding, and then he made his reckless gamble and then ran away and gave his successors the mess to clear up. That referendum got us into the mess. The only way we will be able to have closure in this country is by putting a withdrawal agreement subject to a confirmatory vote by the people and legislating this time that that referendum is legally binding and unambiguously so. And I give way to the honourable member.
The honourable member to give way. Isn't it somewhat ironic that we're now being offered the third general election since the referendum and no sight of a confirmatory referendum?
Absolutely right. There is There is a dire need for us to think about the long-term consequences. If 16 and 17-year-olds are not allowed to have the vote, that generation will be extremely unhappy for many years to come. I think we also need to look at the aspect which has not been mentioned. The DCMS Select Committee highlighted the problems we have with social media and the way in which it is involved in election campaigning. Any election that we hold in a few weeks' time will not be properly regulated and will be open to abuse. Yes, I give way to you.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I was going to raise the very point that he has just raised. And isn't it a fact that we need new legislation on both data and on electoral law to ensure that any future election is not interfered with by people who commit criminal offences?
I congratulate the honourable member on raising that. He has done a fantastic job in highlighting the issue in this House, and I wish him well for the future. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude there.
Mr. Johnny Elfie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I supported Remain in the referendum. My constituents voted to leave. My country voted to leave. The mandate and instructions that I have as a member of this House are clear. And each and every one of us have that same instruction, and we should execute it and do the right thing. It is clear. This House is at an impasse. On this side of the House, members want to get Brexit done and move forward. On that side of the House, members want to cancel Brexit and go back into the European Union. This impasse can only be solved in one way, and that is by the people in a general election to make the final determination. And that is why I will be supporting a general election tonight, and so should each and every one of us.
Order, order. Under the standing order, I must now put the question. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As ministers of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Colin Clark and David Rutley. Tellers for the noes, Bambos Charalambus and Jeff Smith.
Pause!
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 299. The noes to the left, 70.
The ayes to the right, 299. To the noes to the left, 70. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it, the ayes have it, but the motion has not obtained the majority required under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011. And because the order, I'm coming to the right honourable gentleman, because the majority required has not been reached, the noes have it. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition, literally and figuratively, has run away from the judgment of the people for the third time, Mr. Speaker. He's turned down our offer to get Brexit done, in spite of the fact that he and every member of his party stood on a promise to deliver Brexit in this Parliament. And I think, frankly, that the electorate will find his behaviour utterly bewildering. But as I said when moving the motion, we will not allow this paralysis to continue. And one way or another, we must proceed straight to an election. So later on this evening, the government will give notice of presentation for a short bill for an election on the 12th of December so that we can finally get Brexit done. And there is no support in the House, that we've heard earlier on from the benches opposite, for the WAB to proceed. But, Mr. Speaker, this House cannot any longer keep this country hostage. Millions of families and businesses cannot plan for the future, and I don't believe that this paralysis and this stagnation should be allowed to continue. Now that no deal is off the table, we have a great new deal. We have a great new deal. And it's time for the voters to have a chance to pronounce on that deal. And to replace this dysfunctional Parliament with a new Parliament that can get Brexit done so the country can move on.
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm most grateful. It is clear that there is a desire on the opposition benches to bring forward a bill that can give us an election. But, Mr. Speaker, we don't trust this Prime Minister. And we don't trust this Prime Minister for good reason. So the Prime Minister, if he is going to bring forward a bill, must give an absolute cast-iron assurance that up until the passage of that bill and the rising of Parliament, that there will be no attempt to bring forward the withdrawal agreement bill. And of course the SNP will do its job and scrutinise any bill that comes forward. But it's absolutely demonstrably the case that we want an election. We want the people of Scotland to be given the opportunity to have their say. And we will fight that election. We will fight that election, Mr. Speaker, on the right of the Scottish people to determine their own future.
Hear, hear.
And that we will not, under any circumstances, consent to being taken out of the European Union against our will. And that election campaign will make it clear that the right to determine our future will be in the hands of the Scottish people.
Thank you. Point of order, the Father of the House, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, we've just had an hour and a half of a slightly out-of-control student union debate, and it sounds like we might have a rather similar farcical performance tomorrow. Is there any chance, Mr. Speaker, of you as the Chair of the House to persuade the usual channels to resume their meetings and produce a sensible timetable for the bill we have before us, so that this House can resume discussion of these serious matters in a grown-up fashion and come to a resolution on the deal, which personally, I repeat, I will vote for if it reaches third reading, as I think it will, and it could well be that we could get back to the orderly government, which I think the general public are dearly wishing we would rapidly do.
careful note of what the Father of the House has said, and I'm certainly open to any such discussions, but it does require willing participants, and it remains to be seen with the passage of time whether that be so. But I think everybody will be attentive on this occasion, as on every other, to what, on the basis of 49 years' experience in the House, the Father of the House has had to say to us. A point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologise to you and to the Prime Minister for not being here at the point when he raised his point of order. I was detained outside the chamber. I'm now back here. I understand a bill will be tabled tomorrow. We will obviously look and scrutinise that bill, and we look forward to a clear, definitive decision that no deal is absolutely off the table, and there is no danger of this Prime Minister not sticking to his word because he has some form on these matters and taking this country out of the EU without any deal whatsoever, knowing the damage it will do to jobs and industries all across this country.
That point stands in its own right. A point of order, I think, on a completely unrelated matter. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, I believe in correcting things when I get things wrong, and I want to apologise to the Honourable Member for East Yorkshire, a very honourable gentleman, for incorrectly referencing his seat in my point of order earlier on to the Prime Minister. I understand he has, in fact, been re-adopted by his association, and I want to apologise to him for mistaking his seat for another, and for that I truly apologise to him.
Typically gracious of the honourable gentleman, and I have a sense that it will be accepted readily, but let's hear a response in the form of a point of order from Sir Gregory Knight.
That point of order, Mr. Speaker, I accept the very gracious comments just made.
I'm greatly obliged, as the honourable gentleman will be, to the right honourable gentleman. Order. If there are no further points of order, the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Environment Bill, second reading.
Now. Order. Order. Before I invite, we sit here, the Minister, no mere Minister, the Secretary of State herself, to move the second reading, I must announce my decision on certification for the purposes of Standing Order number 83J, with which I'm sure colleagues are keenly familiar, certification of bills, etc., as relating exclusively to England and Wales, and being within devolved legislative competence. On the basis of material put before me, I certify that, in my opinion, clauses 1 to 18, 23, 52, 78, 84 and 88 to 121 of the Environment Bill and schedules 15 to 19 to the bill relate exclusively to England on matters within devolved legislative competence as defined in Standing Order number 83J. And I know colleagues are keenly hanging upon this. Clauses 56, 61, 63, 65, 73 to 75, 77 and 86 of the Environment Bill and Schedule 11 to the bill relate exclusively to England and Wales on matters within devolved legislative competence as defined in Standing Order number 83J. Order the Secretary of State to move the second reading. Secretary Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is a government which recognises the profound importance of the great environmental challenges of our time. We are the first government to set the goal that this generation should leave the natural environment in a better state than it was bequeathed to us. And this is the first government to make a legally binding commitment to become a net zero carbon economy. We've cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% since we returned to office, whilst growing the economy at the same time. And we've pledged more funds than ever before to help the developing world reverse the decline of nature and tackle climate change. We are determined to respond to the grave public concern about these threats. So a new Cabinet Committee will coordinate work on climate change across government under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister. Our action is guided by the mounting scientific evidence of the inextricable link between climate and nature. Wildlife habitats are crucial carbon storage systems. Protecting those forests, peatlands and natural open spaces is vital if we are to have any chance of averting disastrous climate change. And I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Will she confirm that it's government policy that only in extenuating circumstances should Greenbelt be built upon? And the devastating proposals to build on the Greenbelt in Radcliffe, Unsworth and Simister in my constituency will devastate entire Greenbelt areas and completely destroy the character of the village of Simister. Does she agree this is not acceptable in any community?
I agree that it is vital that we protect our Greenbelt, that all Greenbelt rules are abided by, and this government is absolutely determined to defend the Greenbelt as part of our environmental framework. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. This is a very welcome bill, and it builds upon much good work that the government's already done. Would she recognise, though, that in suburban parts of London, like hers and mine, there remains a concern about particulate pollution, and will she look, as the bill makes progress, to see what more we can do to strengthen the fight against particulate pollution in particular, for example, by seeking to strengthen our commitment to joining the WHO guidelines on particulate pollution by 2030?
Well, he will be aware that Clause 2 sets out the ambition to set a legally binding target on fine particulate pollution, responding to exactly the sort of concerns of my right honourable friend and his constituents, and indeed mine in Chipping Barnet. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very, very grateful to my right honourable friend. Planting more trees would make a great contribution to a more beautiful environment and have other good consequences. Can she say a little about how this can be done, and can some of them come to Wokingham, please?
Well, the government has been involved in planting about 15 million trees, but we're determined to ensure that we expand that programme because, of course, trees are crucial storage mechanisms for carbon, and we'll never get to net zero unless we plant a lot more. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
My constituents who, like me, care about nature are absolutely delighted with this bill, and I'm thrilled to be able to support it, particularly for rural communities who are blighted by fly tipping. But will she just watch out for the water abstraction element? It seems uncharacteristically mean.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his praise for the determination expressed in the bill to protect nature and reverse the decline in biodiversity, and we will listen carefully to his concerns and his constituents' concerns about water abstraction to make sure that the bill provisions are implemented in a way which is sensible, proportionate and fair. Yes, I give way.
I thank the honourable lady, my honourable friend, for giving way, my right honourable friend for giving way. So Windsor is a beautiful constituency with a lot of active people campaigning around the environment. But one of our biggest bugbears is Heathrow Airport and any expansion of the airport. Can she confirm to me that this bill contains measures that could well have an impact on Heathrow's ability to expand, given the fine particulates?
Well, certainly it will be vital if the expansion programme at Heathrow goes ahead for it to comply with the exacting environmental requirements that have already been placed on that expansion programme. And naturally enough, it will also have to comply with any new requirements introduced as a result of meeting the target on fine particulate pollution to which we are committed. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way. Minister, we've all got briefs from the Countryside Alliance and various other countryside bodies as well, and they're very clear what they're saying. They said the countryside is a place of great beauty and a habitat for wildlife, but it's also a place of work and home to millions of people. Has government been able to ensure that the farming community, those who own the land, look after the land and have managed it for years, can continue to do so, and that they will not be detrimentally affected by any legislation that would come to disadvantage them?
We believe that the way that we can support farmers in the environmental stewardship that they carry out in caring for our natural environment is through our replacement for the Common Agricultural Policy, which will allow us to go further and faster in providing support for farmers conducting the crucially important role that they have in protecting our natural environment. I give way to the honourable gentleman, and then I must make some progress.
For giving way. Like everybody's constituents here, including mine in Gedling, this bill is very important. It's got a lot of very welcome measures in it. Can I just urge the Secretary of State, if we are to have an election or not over the next few weeks, to look at what can be done to preserve many of the important things that are contained within the bill so that they're not lost. I know that's a matter of process, but it's extremely important to all of us and our constituents.
Thank you. Well, I agree that this landmark legislation needs to continue. At whatever point Parliament dissolves for a general election, I think it is vital that this bill comes back to the House as soon as possible to ensure that we can embed into legislation the important protections that it includes. I'll take one more point and then I'll make some progress. Yes.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I was encouraged by her answer on Heathrow. I just wondered if she still agreed, because she and I were on the same side of this argument for many years. Her quote from 2017, this is a hugely expensive project and one that will create significant economic damage. Her constituents and my constituents agree. Does she still agree with those words today?
Well, as the Honourable Lady has pointed out, my reservations about the Heathrow project are on record for everyone to read. The fact is that the House has voted by a large majority to give outline planning permission to this project. I'm afraid it's now for the scheme promoters to demonstrate that they can come up with a scheme which meets the exacting conditions on the environment which Parliament has set. I'll take one more point.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friends for allowing me to intervene. I, like many members of this House, am one of the team of species champions, each representing an individual species that is in some way endangered in this country. Does she agree with me that it's very important, as we tackle the housing challenge that the United Kingdom faces, that we ensure that developers build houses, create estates in a way that is sustainable for the surrounding countryside, and in particular allows those moving into those areas to live side by side with the nature in the neighbouring area? Otherwise, we'll lose more of the species that are so valuable to us.
He's absolutely right, and that is a core aim of this bill, to make sure that we can deliver the homes that we need, but in a way which safeguards our environment and nature at the same time. No, I've taken a lot of points, and I need to make some progress. So we are determined to seize the opportunities to protect our environment that come with leaving the European Union. And that includes, as I've said already, the opportunity to create more sustainable means of managing our fish stocks and a fairer deal for the communities who have lost out under the common fisheries policy. And it also includes seizing the opportunity to support our farmers to cut emissions and pollution and protect nature with a new system of farm support based on public money for public goods. This bill will help us resolve the bold vision set out in our 25-year environment plan for urgent, meaningful action across society towards long-term environmental targets, so that global Britain can go further and faster for our natural environment. 9 consultations underpin this legislation, and they received over 400,000 responses, and over half the bill's measures extend beyond England. I want to thank the devolved administrations for working with us on the bill so that we can benefit the environment right across our United Kingdom. The bill will enshrine environmental principles in UK law for the first time, ensuring that the environment will be placed at the centre of government decision-making. The following principles are on the face of the bill: that the polluter should pay, that harm should be prevented or rectified at source, that the environment should be taken into consideration across government policy, and that a precautionary approach should be taken. I will take one point.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Will she like to congratulate the Isle of Wight on becoming a UN biosphere earlier this year? And will she work with me to ensure that our precious landscape, both on the island but elsewhere in the UK, is increasingly protected under this Environment Bill to make sure we do not lose it?
I do indeed pass my congratulations to that, for that tremendous achievement. Madam Deputy Speaker, clauses 1 to 6 require the Government to set legally binding, long-term, evidence-based targets. Targets to deliver significant environmental improvement in resource efficiency and waste reduction, biodiversity, air quality and water. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will become the first country in the world to do this. Future governments will be required to publish plans to meet the targets they have set themselves, reviewing milestones every 5 years, making existing targets more demanding or setting new ones if they fall short. And all future governments will be required to report annually on progress on delivering an environmental improvement.
Order. Before the Secretary of State gives way to the plethora of people who wish to intervene, at present, the time limit and the number of people who wish to speak means that speeches will be limited to between 3 and 4 minutes. If people intervene and take more time in the Secretary of State's speech, that will go down significantly. Secretary of State.
Take the point of information from the lady from Regent's Park and Kensington North.
I thank the Minister very much. Will she join me on an issue of air quality and congratulating the Mayor of London for the success of the ultra-low emission zone, which has seen such a dramatic fall in polluting vehicles moving into inner London? But is she also conscious of the fact that 83% of reporting zones across the country are still in breach of air pollution limits? So however much she tells us that the government is going to be doing better, does she recognise just how scandalously short we have fallen in recent years, and we have very serious doubts about what the government is going to do?
Order. We just can't have this, because the Honourable Lady has just spoken for half as long as most people will get who will wait here till 10 o'clock. Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will take the hint. I will make progress, but I would reassure the Honourable Lady that we have made significant advances in cleaning up air quality across the country. There are still significant issues with roadside exceedances. There is more that we need to do, and that's why the bill will be setting out those demanding targets. No, I'm going to make some progress. I want to highlight Clause 2 of the bill. This clause contains one of the most ambitious elements of the legislation, namely a duty to set legally binding targets for PM2.5 fine particulate matter. As members will be aware, this is the pollutant that has the most significant impact on human health. Poor air quality is the biggest environmental threat to public health. It is shortening lives and causing illness, and this government is determined to step up our efforts to clean up the air that we breathe, an issue which I know concerns my constituents in Chipping Barnet, and I'm sure this view is shared by many across our nation. Yes.
I thank her for giving way, and so many of our constituents will be so relieved to hear the House discussing a positive piece of legislation. As a former public health minister, I know that our clean air strategy was described by the WHO as an example to the rest of the world to follow. Will the Secretary of State just say a word about how this bill will enable and help local government to meet its responsibilities in improving air quality across the country?
He's absolutely right. We won't be able to succeed in our ambition to clean up our air quality without strong action for local government. And there are important provisions in this bill to help local government address air quality challenges, for example, in relation to domestic burning. Now, no, I honestly, for the sake of backbench speeches later on, I'm going to have to make some progress. Just as this nation acted successfully to curb the air pollution dangers of the past, so now we need to address this major environmental harm which we face in the modern era. Madam Deputy Speaker, clauses 19 to 38 will establish the Office for Environmental Protection as a powerful new independent watchdog on the environment. It will provide expert independent advice to government on environmental plans. It will scrutinise policy in progress. It will investigate if public authorities fail to live up to their commitments on the environment, and when necessary, it will take enforcement action. The OEP will have a role in enforcing climate change law as well, complementing the functions of the much-respected Committee on Climate Change. This addition to the bill was one for which both EFRA and EAC committees called. As a non-departmental public body, the OEP will be independent of ministerial control. It will have a free-to-use complaint system for the public, and multi-year funding settlements will give it financial stability. The second half of the bill will empower environmental improvement across a range of sectors. It will encourage businesses to innovate and invest in meeting the crucial environmental challenges we face as a nation, and creating additional powers for local government on waste, nature, air quality and water. And I think everyone in the House will agree that we need greater efficiency in the way we treat resources and waste. Our constituents are fed up with litter, fed up with fly tipping and appalled by plastics pollution. No. So this legislation will help us crack down on the blight of waste crime and fly tipping that costs the taxpayer over $600 million every year. It contains a powerful new set of measures to tackle plastic waste.
I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that putting the producer responsible for the plastic that they make will drive a step change in making sure that products are no longer just chucked away, but made to last and be repaired and be recycled and bring an end to this plastic pollution nightmare?
Yeah. She's absolutely right that the extended producer responsibility provisions in the bill will help deliver the results for which she is calling. No thanks. Our Future of the Sea reports estimates that 12 million tonnes of plastic are currently entering the ocean, and this could treble by 2025. And our constituents are demanding change. We must act to address the shocking levels of plastic in the marine environment. And the bill will make it easier to reuse and recycle, so we build a more circular economy at home as well, to conserve and better use our precious natural resources. Clause 49 grants the power to set up a deposit return scheme for products such as drinks containers. Clause 50 enables the plastic bag charge to be extended to other items, a charge which has seen bag use drop by 90% since its introduction. We believe these provisions will be widely welcomed by many who want concerted action to tackle the tragedy of plastics pollution. And the suite of measures in the bill on plastics is further strengthened by powers to make those who produce plastic packaging pay for its whole lifetime cost, including disposal. This will incentivise a switch to more sustainable forms of packaging, and, crucially, it will provide an income stream to fund improvements to the way we tackle waste and recycling. Stronger standards for a wide range of products and clearer labelling will enable consumers to identify more sustainable products. A consistent set of materials will be collected from every household and business to help us all to recycle more. And this bill also includes measures to encourage businesses to waste less food and help ensure that surpluses reach those who need them. Yes.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. I'm a very old-fashioned man, and I come from an age where you mended things if they broke. And I hope that my right honourable friend agrees with me that this bill will encourage people to go back to the days when we actually fixed things rather than throw away at the end of use.
That is one of the outcomes we hope this bill will help deliver. As well as wide-ranging plans on plastics, this bill also has an extensive plan to protect nature at its heart. The net gain provisions in Schedule 15, in a moment, the net gain provisions in Schedule 15 will make a 10% boost for biodiversity a compulsory part of plans for new development. This, I believe, will generate tens of millions of investment in nature and give more people better access to green space. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you. As a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, I am quite sure the Right Honourable Lady will be deeply concerned that we have no functioning assembly. We have not had a functioning assembly for almost 3 years. If we do not have the assembly restored within forthcoming weeks, would the Right Honourable Lady commit to extending much more of this, and I'm using her words, landmark environment bill to Northern Ireland? I think many people in Northern Ireland would be very pleased if she can make that commitment.
Well, I'm not able to make that commitment today, but what I will say is that we've worked very closely with the Northern Ireland Civil Service, so she will be aware that there's many provisions in the bill that are all ready to apply to Northern Ireland. For the moment, they need ministers to switch them on. We will continue to keep this situation under review in terms of governance. I would certainly love to see many more of these measures extended to Northern Ireland, but we do have to respect the constitutional settlement there. We have, no, I'm going to make a bit of progress. We've already strengthened, this government has already strengthened protections for ancient woodlands, veteran trees and irreplaceable habitats, and this bill helps us go further. So Schedule 16 will help combat illegal deforestation, and we are also legislating to give communities a say when local authorities plan to remove treasured trees from urban and suburban streets.
Community involvement. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. She's been very, very generous. On the subject of engaging communities, would she take note of the recent report from the Environmental Audit Committee, on which I sit, into invasive species, to call for an army of volunteers across this country to help identify invasive species where they occur, so that we can help to eradicate them?
I agree that volunteers getting involved in the fight against invasive species is very productive, and indeed there is an example in my own constituency where a group is helping to remove invasive species from Pims Brook. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill will strengthen and improve the duty on public authorities to make sure that the way they carry out their functions both conserves and enhances biodiversity, and it will enable landowners to enter voluntary conservation covenants with responsible bodies such as charities, binding subsequent owners of the land to sustainable stewardship long into the future. And the bill provides an important statutory underpinning for the nature recovery network we outlined in our 25-year plan, for example, by mandating the creation of local nature recovery strategies to map nature-rich habitats. Yes.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State giving way, and as Chairman of the Ocean Conservation APPG, can I very much thank her and on behalf of all of us who care about our seas for the measures in this bill to reduce plastic waste. But another thing we very much welcome is the additional powers to hold water companies to account. And can she confirm that these extra powers will help to reduce the number of sewer overflows at times of heavy rain and hold water companies to account to reduce and eventually eradicate that from happening?
He's right that the bill does contain measures which will make it easier to maintain the pressure on water companies to do more to combat pollution. We want them to do better when it comes to tackling these completely unacceptable instances of sewer overflows and pollution. Clean, no, I'm going to wind up now. Clean, safe, abundant water for all is a fundamental focus of this bill. The provisions of Part 5 will improve the way companies operate to meet current and future demand. It'll help ensure improved long-term water resources. It'll help wastewater planning and enable more resilient solutions to drought and flooding. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, just as this bill seeks to put nature and climate at the heart of government decision-making, the government is also placing these environmental goals at the heart of our efforts to relieve poverty around the world. So we're doubling our international climate finance funding and investing $220 million to protect international biodiversity. Working with overseas territories, we're on track to protect over 4 million square kilometres of the ocean by the end of 2020. And we are leading a global ocean alliance determined to protect at least 30% of the ocean in marine protected areas by 2030. As we look ahead to co-hosting COP26, we want this country to lead global ambition for international targets on climate, ocean and biodiversity. And I hope that in years to come, people will look back on 2020 as a turning point, a time when we came together, both nationally and internationally, to start to reverse the disastrous erosion of nature and wildlife. There can be no doubt that reversing the tragedy of biodiversity loss is a massive task. But the legislation before the House today sets up a vitally important framework to enable that process of recovery to accelerate. This is a truly landmark piece of legislation, enshrining environmental principles in law, requiring this government and its successors to set demanding, legally binding targets, and creating a world-leading environment watchdog to hold them to account. Madam Deputy Speaker, in my maiden speech in this House, I extolled the beauty of the open spaces of my Chipping Barnet constituencies. I emphasised the crucial importance I place on protection of the green belt and our natural environment. Well, 15 years on from that speech, I remain convinced that there can be few things more important for a member of this House than to be able to say that during their time in elected office, they played a part in conserving the stunning landscapes, wildlife and natural habitats of this great country. Well, in its 232 pages, its 130 clauses and its 20 schedules, this bill will help us all to do that, and I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and just before I call the Shadow Minister, I should warn honourable members that there will be an initial time limit on speeches of 4 minutes, and that is likely to reduce very soon to 3 minutes. Sue Hayman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the Secretary of State and her civil servants for meeting with me last week. And I'd also like to acknowledge all the work that's been put into this bill by civil servants, NGOs and others who've brought the bill to this stage. And I believe that we can all acknowledge that it contains improvements on the original draft. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, Greener UK, which is the organisation representing environmental NGOs, has said that this bill is, and I quote, in need of significant amendment before it is capable of guaranteeing that we do not fall below current standards.
Yep. I thank my friend for giving way, and would she agree with me that leaving the European Union, or the risk of leaving the European Union, makes a lot of these environmental protections very at risk indeed?
Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely vital that as we leave the European Union, that all the necessary environmental protections are in place and equivalent to what we have at the moment. I'd also like to say that the chair of the EFRA Select Committee, the Honourable Member for Tiverton and Honiton, has also raised concerns, and he said despite the government attempting to establish a robust framework for environmental governance, it appears to have fallen short of its own ambitions. So it's clear that improvements are still needed. We know that nature is in a worse state than when the Conservative government came to power. This is shown in the latest RSPB State of Nature report, which found that 41% of UK species studied have declined and that no real improvements have been made since their report in 2016. Greener UK is also concerned about the government's commitment to resource vital environmental work, saying that for the bill to succeed, it will require a step change in resourcing of local government, the Office for Environmental Protection, and frontline delivery agencies such as Natural England and the Environment Agency.
Would you give way?
I'll give way.
I'd be grateful if the Honourable Lady could confirm that she welcomes the ambition in the bill to be the first generation to leave the environment in a better state than in which we inherited it. But does she also agree with me that that means that the bill should perhaps reflect a non-regression principle? In other words, that our environmental standards should not fall below what we currently have.
The Honourable Lady makes a very important point, and I shall be coming to the issue of non-regression further on. Okay.
I'm grateful to Forgiving Way. She's making a powerful case. The Secretary of State was talking a lot about how this bill is supposed to put in place a long-term vision. Would she share my concern about what it says about biodiversity net gain, that those net gain sites are only actually guaranteed for 30 years? They can be ploughed up after 30 years. Does that reflect a long-term vision, do you think?
Yeah, I think, thank the Honourable Lady. I mean, that does reflect some of my concerns. And I also have concerns about backing everything on to net gain, because actually in other countries where this has taken place, Australia, for example, it is not shown to be as effective as would have been hoped for. I'm just going to make some progress because I'm aware of the shortage of time. So, obviously, we're going to have detailed discussion of the bill at committee, but I'd just like to touch upon a few areas today.